Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. I'm Josh Meyer, today's guest co-host. I'm going to keep our introductions brief because we have a lot of ground to cover. And of course, you're not here to hear from me, but from the two gentlemen that I have the privilege of joining this conversation with me today. I wanted to quickly mention that I'm a big believer in personal development and the idea that life improves by surrounding yourself with the right people. And today is a great example of that. I'm honored to be in the room with these leaders who share many of the same philosophies as we do at our firm, Peak Legacy Partners, and whose work has shaped how families think about legacy. First up is my co-host, Stan Miller, who's the founder of this podcast and the Legacy Leaders Network, as well as a nationally respected estate planning attorney, an author, and a legacy steward. He's the founder of Wealth Council, the author of Your American Legacy, and Stan has helped families protect billions and, more importantly, pass on meaning and purpose to future generations. Stan, we appreciate you being here.
Great to be here. Honored, for sure, Josh. Thanks.
And then, of course, our guest, the one and only Chuck Oliver, who's the founder of The Hidden Wealth Solution and the host of Hidden Wealth Radio. Chuck's work focuses on tax-smart retirement income and estate planning strategies that help families preserve not only wealth, but also adding values and vision for generations to come. He is on a crusade to reduce the portion of your wealth that is ultimately paid out in taxes in order so that we have more resources to leave those that we care most about. So today we're going to be getting into the conversation of tax-efficient planning and how that can amplify our legacy, not only how much money we actually leave, but the fact that we're able to leave more than just money. So, gentlemen, thanks again for being here.
Great to be here. Honored as well.
Awesome. And before we get into some specific concepts about tax strategy, Chuck, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background as far as why you got so focused not only on the financial side of things, but tax strategy and legacy specifically.
Sure. I tell people I used to be the perfect taxpayer. Did everything I thought I was doing right and ended up just paying more and more tax, and then realized that, helping people from a wealth optimization standpoint, we have a couple little sayings, right? Don't build the castle if you're not going to build the moat. And, when we look at the fact that 8 out of 10 clients that we talk to do not have an estate plan, they don't have a trust. Some may say they have a will, which we all know is immediate probate. It's fascinating that they aren't thinking long term. And I was one of those people, right? So sadly, losing both of my parents, I'm really not that old. I lost them at kind of young ages when I was 7 and when I was 47. And neither had estate plans. As much as I did everything in my power to make sure, my mother had a trust, but unfortunately wasn't designed properly. Still had to go through the state of Ohio's probate process. A grandfather who I had, one of my good fraternity brothers that was a pretty successful estate planning attorney out of the Midwest, actually even drove to my grandfather's home, right, at the age of 89. And I could have cared less to have a dollar out of my grandfather's estate who raised me. But, for him, it was like, he called me and said, Chuck, there's just used to be the days that you could just shake a man's hand, and I can't see signing 95 pieces of paper. And my mother and I spent about 3 years going through that process, my mother being an only child back at that time frame, and just getting his estate settled. So on the front end, I thought I understood, and I went out and tried to find like the top, tax people. And what I found was I was bringing them the strategies. And as I would bring them the strategies, they would not apply the strategies properly. So then they would bill me to learn the strategies. Then they would bill me to fix the strategies. And I think that probably trumps the definition of insanity, right? Not just doing the same thing over and expecting a different result, but doing it with the same person and expecting a different result. So I quickly looked at the situation. I said, if we're going to truly serve people, the biggest thing, and especially for those listening that are high W-2 income earners or, strong income earner, self-employed, or even high income retirees, the thing that costs us the most, ironically, is the thing that gets the least amount of attention. It's just uncanny when you think about it. And so we ended up kind of that Gandhi quote, right? You must become the change you want to see. And we went out and brought in our own tax team, former Deloitte, Price Waterhouse, kind of were with kind of the big, the big firms, but had more of a down to earth, personalized approach, right? Where it wasn't just tell people how much they owe, teach people how much less they have to pay. And when we looked at that kind of as like two bookends on the front end, right? What can you do by redirecting these unnecessary taxes that could be going to building legacy, building wealth, expanding your company, retiring yourself sooner, right? From one perspective. And then the other side, people never, which I'm sure we'll talk about, people never, I don't think, plan to leave, 30, 40% tax rates to their children, right? And inheriting these inherited IRAs. And so when you look at both ends of that, I'm kind of a victim of circumstance. I knew what to do, I thought, but then I found more intelligent people than me, which is obviously Gates' secret to success, right? Hire people that are smarter than you. And then just surround yourself by really, really intelligent people that have kind of a knack or a niche. And so that's what we've done. So that way we, from a estate planning standpoint, from a tax planning standpoint, from a wealth building standpoint, we're fortunate to have like an entirely carved divisions of our practice so that whether a client like yourself, right, being a relationship advisor that's looking to have tax savings for their clients, right, we don't introduce them to the wealth side, right? That's your side of the fence. And yet we can still come in and be, add a lot of complementary support, just like Stan in estate planning and we with tax planning that really, I think, pack a really solid 1, 2, 3 punch.
I think that's great. Having the comprehensive approach and still also being able to partner and not just thinking that you're going to do everything for everybody, but taking advantage of those partnerships is huge. You touched on something that I find sometimes is a difficult shift to make in the minds of clients, and that is going from kind of reactive tax planning to filing at the end of the year, just doing what we feel like is a foregone conclusion, to shifting into something that's more proactive and not just thinking about the upcoming year, but several years down the road. Can you tell me a little bit about what your guys' approach is as far as that goes, and any ways you found more effective to help people implement that?
It's interesting. I remembered this quote and I hadn't used it in years, and it really hit me because I had that similar question proposed. And, Confucius has this great quote: tell me, I may forget; show me, and I may remember; involve me, and I will understand. And so what we did is we created a process that helped people understand the tax risk road that they're traveling, as we like to say, right? So in other words, you can't be aware of something you've never been made aware of. So people, I think, really, really underestimate the impact of taxes, right? Because you hear this, the talking heads, right, default to, you should be able to live on 70, 75, 80% of your pre-retirement income and so forth. And I sit back and look at them like, who wants to work hard, save hard, and have less at the end of the rainbow? Like, what is that about? Like, so what we do is we create a process, Josh, which you're somewhat familiar with, where we can show what the short and the long-term tax impact effects are. Because of course we know there's several things that get detonated, right? That kind of the torpedoes of whether that's not planning Roth conversions properly and hitting yourself for higher Medicare taxes or higher up to 85% of your Social Security benefits being taxed. So basically showing people and then being able to show them, okay, and then here's the GPS of the better route, right? The alternative routes that you'd be able to take. And then to what Stan does and you do from a legacy on the backside, we make them fully aware that, don't go to all this trouble. And then, like we said, don't build the castle if you're not going to build the moat. Get it all right on the front and then have it get absolutely annihilated on the back. So that's why, that process kind of shows them the present and the future. And then they can obviously have more choice and control. And if we have time, I've got a great little example of someone, right, that was just excited about, Roth converting their father's inherited IRA. I'll share this really quickly. And he said to us, hey, Chuck, I want to get with you and Roth convert this 300 grand I inherited from my father. Now, mind you, at about the time we expire is about the time the adult children are in a position in their highest wage earning years, to retire. And when you think about it, it almost seems like a conspiracy theory by the Internal Revenue Service, because it does line up rather well. So in this client's case, we'll call him Chris. I said, Chris, the bad news is you cannot Roth convert an inherited IRA. Right? A non-spousal inherited IRA. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, after doing your tax plan, right? I wish we could have planned for this, which was the light bulb went off saying, okay, this is where we need to, from a great wealth transfer perspective, be looking out at this generational relationship, right? Where we're going to have what they're rumoring now, 124 trillion changing hands over the next 20 years, right? From generation to generation. And in this particular case, I'll land the plane here. When we looked at it, between his federal and state tax on roughly a 10,000 inherited required distribution, 4,200 of it's going to the government. And there's not a darn thing he can do about it unless he does something about it from a tax strategy, right? So there's things that we were able to do to create deductions to get the inherited IRA out of the picture, not push, more and more tax on top of what was obviously a very kind, heartfelt inheritance left by his late father that I'm sure his father would never assume that, hey, I'm going to do this for my son and list him as the beneficiary, and then boom, right? 42% of every dollar just goes to the government, and that's at today's tax rates. So it's interesting, but I think that process and now being more keen on being more proactive, as you use the word, is where we brought in proactive tax CPAs and attorneys that are part of our team, that we can forecast that, and then people can start making decisions now. When you think about it, this time compression is so important, right? Trump's likely not going to get a third term. And so if we know, at least under policy now, permanent, we know in Congress, the running joke is, right, tax policy should be written in pencil, right? Because the next administration can erase. Well, then this is where people need to get on their guns and start learning what are the best strategies to remove their income and their assets from the tax system as strategically and as proactively, obviously, as they can.
Yeah, Josh, I just want to jump in quickly and underscore what Chuck is saying about this proactivity. It's really true that the accounting community almost universally is reactive. I like to say that I wouldn't want to ride in a car with one of these guys because I think they drive looking in the rearview mirror. And so by the time you sit down with them to prepare your taxes for last year, it's every option is gone because the year's already passed. So this idea of being proactive, communicating the concept that if you get in front of this, there are lots of things that you can do, but if you wait until next year, it's too late. And so communicating the idea of acting sooner so that we can be proactive rather than reactive is an important concept. And then I would just follow that on to say that I don't think I've ever had a client in all of my years of work as an estate planning attorney where clients told me that they wanted to pay more taxes. Clearly, everybody would like to pay less in taxes. But the other thing I've found, I just want to make this point. The other thing I've found is that while it may seem like saving taxes is the most important thing for clients, it turns out that it's really not. What most clients don't want to do is to work hard and save money and even work hard to save taxes and then leave it all to kids in chaotic ways that result in the kids developing addictive behavior patterns, wasting money, losing work ethic, all of that. What it turns out is more important to our clients, even in saving taxes, is having the confidence that they have a plan to leave good kids. And this is where I feel like our working together is so compelling. It's so powerful because we can not only help clients save taxes, and that is, I think, the carrot that's dangled out there that gets people in the door. And we can, Chuck knows how to do this. He's really good. He does it with skill, with empathy. But once he's done that, then he's now able to connect with his client in a way that opens the door to a broader range of planning solutions that help the clients accomplish more of the things they want, things that are really important, that somebody who just thinks in a silo where they're only about the tax return or saving money, they don't think like that. And so what I love about the way Chuck works is that he actually explores that full range of client objectives, and that $124 trillion is going to pass. When I think about it, that's a lot of money. That's never happened, in the history of the human race. We've never had wealth on that scale passing hands, generally speaking, passing hands from the generation that earned and saved it into the hands of people who did not earn it. And so we don't really know what the consequences that will be. What we do know is that back in, I think, 2012, Ohio State University, a university you all might be familiar with, did a study.
Wait.
They found that on average it takes people about 19 months to get rid of their inheritance. So when clients find that out, they're pretty motivated not to just save taxes, but to preserve it and then pass it on in a way that maximizes the power and the value and the impact of it.
Yeah.
That's excellent insight. And that's, well, one of the things you said, Stan, that I wanted to make a comment on to bring it out even further is that I think the importance of working together as a team when you've got, the estate, the legal side of the estate planning, you've got the financial side as well as the tax reduction. I feel like showing clients that they can save money in taxes is one thing, but when you show them that doing that allows them to live more fully in retirement and also transfer more money to the next generation and do so in a way that does not lead to problems like you mentioned, Stan, is such a powerful thing. And one of us by ourselves aren't necessarily going to give that level of, the vantage point that allows them to do all three of those things. So agree with that 100%. What do you guys, from what you've seen, think are some of the most common tax misconceptions or mistakes that people make? And I was thinking we'll kind of almost rattle these off, rapid fire and then get into a couple of examples of case studies. But I would like to touch on, some of the mistakes people make.
I'm happy to jump in there. The number one mistake that we see people make is not thinking through that there's a difference between tax deferral and tax savings, right? So most of us, at least a lot of the clients we work with, although we're getting quite a few introductions to adult children, so that the parents that have, just we find 95% of the people we meet with have saved 95% of their money in traditional tax deferred 401ks, IRAs, is that they really don't want to see their kids make that same mistake. In fact, a lot of our clients from a legacy question will say, well, look, we want to live our own legacy to the fullest because our kids are actually doing better than we are. And then several obviously want to live more and leave more, right? So it's kind of across the board. But then when somebody realizes that you're not saving tax, you're deferring tax, especially if you're somebody that's a high income earner, or you're somebody that wants to be more in your go-go years once you retire and spend more and enjoy that while you can, while your health supports it, et cetera, then it's just the mistake we see is people not taking the time to educate themselves, Josh, on really understanding what the long-term and even in the short-term impact are, and then thinking out from the standpoint of, I was seeing how Bissent came out, right? The Treasury Secretary sharing that it looks like tariffs could produce about 500 billion. I think that was out this week, about 500 billion to the bottom line per year. Now, everyone's got a different opinion on that, of course. And of course, the naysayers are clearly saying that's not possible, but it seems to be that the tide has shifted. And yet the interest on our debt alone is more than that. And so, I think people also, the mistake is thinking they're going to be in a lower tax bracket or pay lesser tax in retirement. And if somebody's a higher income earner now, to Stan's point earlier, not only as I'm sure I've not ran across any client that ever wanted to pay more tax, but most people just don't realize how much more tax they're going to end up having to pay. And it's about as good as it's going to get right now, I'm afraid, based on how low tax rates are right now. So I think not recognizing time of the essence, not recognizing that tax deferral is different from tax savings, and then just making sure, right, that they have a game plan, we see to be the most common mistakes.
Absolutely. Those are great. I appreciate that. And then are there anything you can think of, Stan, you see in practice from an estate planning perspective?
Yeah. So, I generally looked at the world first through the estate planning prism. And, one of the things that's happened over the years, whenever I first became an estate planning attorney, every single person I talked to, certainly every married couple I talked to, the estate tax was the first conversation we had. And generally, because it was so compelling, didn't really have to have any other conversation because dealing with the estate tax was all we needed to get movement, to get the plan done, right? Because even if you had a married couple who had a net worth of $700,000 or $800,000 combined, they only had $600,000 exemptions each. They weren't portable, so if the husband died and left everything to the wife, then when there was no tax on that because they were married, but when she died, if she had $800,000, there was a 55% tax on everything over 600. So $800,000 would produce like a $110,000 estate tax liability, and that motivated everybody to do estate planning where we built in the structures into a living trust that would avoid that. And so we didn't really have to talk about all of the other outcomes they wanted. And I will tell you, and this may be in the nature of a confessional when I say this, but we really, I would say the entire estate planning community really, really depended on the estate tax as the driver for what we did. And that was, for the most part, the sole focus of the conversation. So we never got to serious conversations around second marriage protection. How do we leave assets to kids in ways that protect them from divorces and lawsuits and their own immaturity? Whether or not we want to set up some kind of a charitable arrangement. All of those issues didn't really get much focus because we had already hooked them in with the estate tax conversation. And then, in 2001, when George W. Bush came in and we got this revision to the estate tax that kicked the exemption up to $1 million and then eventually to $3 million in 2010, the estate tax became less and less and less of a driver. And now, today, under the law that exists at this moment, at least come January of 2026, everybody's going to have a $15 million per person exemption. So a married couple who believes with some confidence that they're never going to hit the $30 million net worth number, the estate tax is not a driver. And so that, in a way, is a huge opportunity for us because now we can push aside the estate tax conversation. At least this is how I'm navigating the conversation with clients. I can take the estate tax issue off the table. I mean, not the income tax issue, totally separate thing, but I can take the estate tax issue off the table, certainly if they live in a state that does not have a state estate tax. And then we can focus on the real human issues, second marriage protection, how do we leave assets to kids? How do we make sure that our financial assets are aligned with the legacy the non-financial legacy we want to leave? And actually, I feel liberated now that I don't have, for most clients, I don't have to get pulled into the estate tax conversation. I can focus on the things that actually, it turns out, really matter more to clients. But yeah, so that's been a shift that has occurred, I think, certainly over my career.
That's interesting. Yeah, it probably leads to a deeper type of planning with the client and working with more emotional issues rather than just handling the estate tax. Awesome.
Yeah.
Chuck, I was hoping, I know that you guys go through a lot of kind of examples of clients you work with. Is it taxessave.com? Is that your website where you have different case studies usually on there?
We do. Yep. Taxessave.com. We actually do a Taxes Save case of the week.
Yeah.
And what I like about it is these are real clients. We actually position the strategy that was used to accomplish the tax savings directly by the actual filed tax return, obviously all held in, confidential, no exposure to clients' names or addresses or what have you, but with that permission and being able to actually show real examples, right? It's very challenging, as I'm sure it is clearly with what Stan does in the estate planning world and what you see obviously in the financial planning world and what we see in the tax planning world of all these influencers that are out there that are giving what I would say pretty much half truths, not fully disclosing the reality of, the TikTok or the whatever post that they've put out there. So we got very, very serious about saying, you know what, let's really legitimize this and make sure people really understand like these things are not only possible, here's absolute proof of exactly what has taken place. So yeah, it's taxessave.com and it's a very simple site to navigate. What we did is we created 2 case studies, a high income earner saving taxes, putting that back into building legacy, and then for their earlier retirement per se. And then another client that we actually did a $1 million tax Roth conversion, and they were actually able to move $1 million out of their IRA to Roth IRA with offsetting through, legal deductions within the code, some of which have been around since 1958, that actually enabled them to make that transition. So it didn't trigger Medicare tax. It's an above line deduction. So it didn't trigger higher tax to their federal or state. And they were actually able to maneuver that. And it was kind of a good timing from that standpoint too, because this was at about the time, the one that we actually put on it's an on-demand webinar, by the way. You just go there, click the red square with the white button, and you can watch it at your leisure, anybody that's interested. But it was right before when the tariffs kind of hit that turmoil point in April, we'll call it. And then the market shot up, a little more than 30% plus now. The great news is that particular client captured all of that 30% increase tax-free in that Roth position as opposed to tax deferred. So it's kind of nice when people realize not only the tax risk road they're traveling, but the cost of waiting calculation, which we have calculators for that show the importance of the time compression to take advantage of things that may be, who knows, hopefully if we get this thing completely turned around, which it sounds like Trump's making good strides in doing so, a lot of people are forecasting there could be some really great things to come. But either way, when people have not experienced required minimum distributions, they really don't understand the lifetime tax exposure that they're taking on, as well as the tax exposure they're taking on for their children, especially like you said, Stan. I'd not heard 19 months. That's really fascinating. I'd always heard that the stat I heard, and I'm sure it's old school now, was 80 or 85% of inheritances are gone within the first 24 months. But man, if it's down to 19, that's even more concerning.
That was Ohio State that found that, so.
Was it? Okay. Well, then
Yeah,
it's got to be
yeah.
right. It's got to be right,
Right,
Josh?
yeah.
It was faster around that area.
Yeah. But yeah, so you figure too much is given, much is expected. It's fascinating how that was the next epiphany we had was, hey, we've really got to get on our guns and educate from these examples like I gave with Chris earlier about this 42% off the top of this inherited required distribution from that inherited IRA of his late father, that it's time to have those conversations, right? It's time to have the conversation. So we actually were just the gentleman referred his, unfortunately, health failing 86-year-old father that has about 10 million in his IRA right now. His RM required distribution is absolutely outrageous. And the son himself is going to be inheriting a lot of tax. So it's good to see that the message is getting out there that people need to pay more attention to this. But yeah, taxessaved.com, we put different case studies each week, real clients, and people can then scroll down. We also put in there real quickly the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the outcome, the opportunities, and the obstacles, right? Because a lot of people are puzzled with what's permanent, what's supposedly permanent, what's temporary, how's this going to affect me? And it's a little kind of a Reader's Digest, kind of 8-page report that people can put in their hand. And the on-demand webinar is complimentary. And then if they scroll down, you can just request a saving tax optimization plan analysis. It was actually a book I haven't finished called The Stop Overpaying Taxes, STOP, Saving Tax Optimization Plan. And it just shows people the retirement risk road that they're on and helps them really realize, like, wow, you know what? I need a roadmap to navigate and reroute onto another, GPS surface here, because right now this road's not looking too promising.
Great. Yeah, no question. And I know we were planning on diving a little bit deeper into case studies today, but I know with having access to the Taxes Saved website, maybe some of our listeners and audience can kind of dive into that for greater details. But one of the things you said towards the end there was kind of alluding to the importance of process. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on and get your guys' feedback on, because I feel like, a lot of people, a lot of professionals out there have all the knowledge that it takes to provide sound advice, whether it's financial or from an estate planning perspective. But I think processes where a lot of people don't get engaged to the level where they really uncover all of the nuances of their situation and really kind of explore all the potential opportunities within their plan. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that you have and how that helps uncover some of those things?
Yeah, it's interesting as you use those words. That's what we say, the helping people discover and uncover their hidden wealth, right? And it's obviously starts with the taxes, as we like to say. Don't let your IRAs become an IOU to the IRS. So the process, and we have this all on our website and so forth, but the process is very simple. We keep it 4 simple steps, right? We do a tax savings discovery analysis where we go through and show the tax risk. That's complimentary. We go through that with clients. We encourage both spouses, if there's partners or married couple, et cetera, to be in that meeting. And we're really encouraging people now, especially if it's a widow, because of course we all know about the widow tax penalty, right? Where you bust through the brackets so much faster. And people we see, especially in what you do, Josh, which I know you look at that from an income protection perspective, don't really plan out like pension protection or loss of the lower of the 2 Social Securities or the impact of the widow tax penalty. So we actually encourage widows and widowers, who is that executor to your estate or the trustee, et cetera. Ideally, they'll have a trustee and have that family member be part of that actual meeting so that they can get in tune with what's going on. And so we're finding in a lot of cases, it's kind of like, like with your kids, right? Sometimes it's easier for somebody else to say it to our children than it is them hearing it from us, right? I got story after story on that one. But by being able to then show, right, from a non-biased opinion of just the reality of their tax world, we go through that. Then if they engage, we then have our tax team. We actually have over 94 approved strategies now with our 900 CPA network nationwide that have vetted the strategies, approved the strategies. Now, of course, not all 94 are going to apply to every individual, but it will decipher the top 5 or 10 strategies that'll come back, especially with AI these days and advanced software. It'll find the top 5 to 10 strategies. It'll bring them back and it'll actually rank them. The best car you should buy, like this one's ranked a 9 out of 10, an 8 out of 10, whatever. And it'll put them in that order, but there's no bias to what the client prefers. But as we narrow that scope, we then can provide more educational resources so we're not inundating them with 94 overviews. We can give them the top 2 or 3 that they really are particular towards and give them more education. And then we set a follow-up meeting with our lead CPA and actually show them their tax return as if it was already completed for the year before it ever gets filed next April or next October. So they can see, hey, here's not just the concept, but here's the reality to our bottom line of what we're going to be able to save in taxes. And we just find that's just a much more appealing educational process because they're educating themselves. And at that point, we shepherd them through our 4th step, which we call the accountability support and review, take them all the way through the implementation phase of that so that they can make sure everything was done right. And the key catalyst to that whole thing is that our tax team uses the same strategies themselves. So it's very easy for our team does the same and our tax team to be able to share like, hey, here's why I like one of the strategies you chose because this is a strategy that I use for my own personal family. Here's what I think should come out of that. And they find, Josh and Stan, they'll find a couple of little caveats like, hey, while we're on this topic, we did find this other that this may be a good opportunity for you to do this or do that on top of the strategic strategy. And at that point, the client, in our particular case, it has the opportunity to actually then have their tax work done by our tax team if they so should choose. Because some of the feedback is, hey, my person, there are numbers in, there are numbers out. They don't do proactive tax planning. Can I work with you or do you guys support that? So, of course, we wanted to make sure, which we see a high percentage of people doing that, especially when you figure 75% of people's tax professionals are going to be retired here in about 5 to 10 years. That they're looking for that, right? They want somebody that can kind of complete all the puzzle pieces to make sure it's not only done most strategically, but it's actually filed properly and that our CPA team can stand behind that.
Let me just underscore the importance of that. 2 really quick points here. One is following through to make sure it gets done. You can float up the best ideas, but if they don't get executed properly, they end up creating a toxic waste dump downstream. And that's horrible for everybody. The clients, do not have a good experience with that. The other point I want to make is that by having a process that literally forces you to think about this broad range of issues helps, it goes a huge distance in helping you avoid and there should be a name for this, and I've been trying to figure out what to call it, but I find that among professionals, and this is true among insurance professionals, it's true with these estate planning attorneys, it is true among doctors, is that the thing that you do most often, like the common thing that you do becomes the solution for everything. There's a saying around that if you talk to surgeons, they'll say the cut is to cure, right? If you go see a surgeon with a condition, there's a real high probability that their solution is going to be, let me cut on you, because that's what they do, right? So what I have found is that professionals get into a silo and they see the solution as being the thing they do most frequently. Having the process, Chuck, like you described, it literally forces you to consider other alternatives that may not be things that you do every day. And so it keeps you from falling into this trap of offering up the one solution that you know how to do best.
Yeah. And you know what? To that point, we find without a strategy, about 80 to 85% of people actually don't benefit from Roth converting. It's a pretty high statistic, right? And fortunately, working with some really smart software people and people have been in the industry for 30 plus years, we have that software capability. So sometimes it's understanding, just to your point, Stan, sometimes it's the understanding a good surgeon would say, this isn't your best interest to go under the knife, right? Your best
Right.
interest is an alternative. And here's a couple other alternative solutions that would be, we feel in our professional fiduciary responsibility, believe that this would be better for you. So that's what's really important. But the sad part is, people just default, right? They have that default button. So people hear like, hey, I should do a Roth conversion because my neighbor did it or my brother did it. It's like, well, maybe that's not what's best for you. But at the same time, if it's carte blanche that, hey, everybody should do a Roth conversion or 85% of people shouldn't, well, you got to go deeper. You got to figure out like, hey, do these people qualify for more advanced strategies? Is there something that could be a surgical procedure that the person had not heard about that could be a good cure for that particular, ailment, what have
Right.
you. So yeah, I like that, right? It doesn't mean just because you're a surgeon, you should just cut.
Yep.
100%. Yeah, I think the bottom line is every situation is extremely unique, and yeah, until you engage with a professional that you trust and get their insight by sharing information, you don't know which is best for you. So I think that I couldn't think of a better place to end it. Although I could sit here and talk with you guys all day about these strategies. Speaking of, for any of our listeners who would like to go a little bit deeper on the things that we've shared today and some other tax strategies that we have available that Chuck uses. We are going to be holding a webinar, it looks like on September the 30th at 7 p.m. And actually, we have a wait list currently going. The website is taxes.yourpeaklegacy.com. If you want to get on that waiting list, we'll make sure that you are invited to that. But again, that'll be September 30th at 7 p.m. Hopefully, all three of us will be there, just going a little bit deeper and sharing more strategies. Gentlemen, I certainly appreciate your insight, your conversation. It was a lot of fun for me. Do you guys, either of you guys have any kind of last words as we part?
I'll throw in that I think the other big misnomer people miss is, and we're fortunate to have it to Stan's point, maybe it triggered my thought on it, was, in essence, think out of the box, right? Know that it's not a one size fits all. And one of the things that we found very intriguing is for people not realizing that they can get access to their 401k, which has everything to do with doing earlier time compression Roth conversions, that it's actually our legal team was able to find that where they can actually roll over to a spouse. So it's called an in marriage quadro. They actually can roll over to their spouse, their 401k. And then not only do they have more options available, but they now, when a plan doesn't provide an in-plan Roth conversion opportunity for the right person or the right circumstance, now they have the freedom and control to control that 401k in their family and get it Roth converted on a much lower level. Because what people don't realize is, and the case study I had prepared today, which we can go on in the webinar about, was the cost of waiting. So I took a 62-year-old that we just met with. We figured out, like someone like yourself that ran their portfolio to see what kind of rate of return they were earning. He was averaging around 8% and net, let's call 7. And the tax will be the equivalent at today's tax rates, will be the equivalent of his balance. So that's where that 62-year-old referred, right, their 38-year-old and said, you need to take a look at this. That 38-year-old, the longer you wait, right, the more tax you're going to pay. But that 38-year-old was looking at like a 10x of balance to lifetime tax relationship, right? So let's just say they'd save 500,000, right? They're going to pay 5 million, which most people can't comprehend that, right? The power of compounding can obviously work against you too. So I think just the understanding that somebody listening, you don't have to be retired. You could be somebody working and you just want to figure out a way to really protect yourself from future tax uncertainty. There's some really good things that you can do. And I'll gladly bring that up in our webinar. I'm glad to hear that you put the site out there again. Give that site again. It's taxes and what?
Taxes.yourpeaklegacy.com.
Great.
So,
Great.
yeah. And then we'll
Super.
have that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
I just underscore Chuck's point. You got to get in front of it. If you get in front of it, you can solve all kinds of things. If you wait until after, there's almost nothing you can do.
Right on.
And also, when we get it right from a legacy perspective, we have the opportunity and the obligation to share that with future generations so that we're not starting from scratch, right? Next time around.
Exactly.
Right on.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like I shared with you, Josh, the last time we met. I'll say it quickly. A client of mine, if you think about the money's the byproduct, right? At the end of the day, the money's the byproduct. And what this client said was, she said, Chuck, I want you to take this tax savings and I want you to take all of my 19 grandchildren's dates of birth and I want you to figure out when they're going to reach the age of 18 of what an inflation adjusted grandma graduating grandchild one-on-one cruise is going to cost. And I said, well, Rita, that's quite interesting. Tell me more about that. She said, well, it's very simple, Chuck. My grandkids are never going to remember the money. but they're going to remember the memories. And she said, so which I always give her credit for this, she said, I want to go down in my legacy with my grandchildren as a memory heir, not a millionaire. And I thought, wow, that's profound. So that's what it's really all about.
Okay, write that down.
Well, we thank you guys for being on the Legacy Leaders podcast. Thanks to everybody listening. And we look forward to the upcoming event. You guys check it out. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.